Hello and welcome to Politics here on France 24. Well, the dreaded numbers are finally in for the French economy and they're not good. France needs to find another 12 billion euros to reach its budget deficit target this year and a whopping 33 billion for next year. This at a time when growth is screeching to a halt and as the euro crisis is still on the horizon. Also in French politics, the former ruling party, the Conservatives, are trying to find a leader and a way to regain the ground lost in a series of elections, starting with the presidential election. On the set today is Denis de Montpion, who is a senior writer with the Nouvel Observateur magazine, Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, a columnist with the Sunday Telegraph, and Mathieu Douaret, who is with the Ipsos polling Institute. So this week was an important week for the Socialist Prime Minister Jean-Marc Ayrault. He went before the National Assembly and had to get a vote of confidence. People knew he would get it because the Socialists have a clear majority in the Parliament, 302 votes in favor, 225 against. Let's take a listen to Jean-Marc Ayrault and then we'll listen to the reaction from the opposition.
Recovery for the sake of employment, that is the finality of our action. And so I ask you, members of parliament, to keep aware of the fact that that finality today is a veritable struggle, but a struggle that we will have to wage and a fight that we will have to win. But this fight can only be won with the support and the commitment of everyone.
It's a speech lacking heart, lacking energy, and lacking clear-sightedness. It was based on verbal incantation, which means that, as Mr. Ayrault said himself, change will be slow and decline is clearly for tomorrow.
An important performance always for the incoming Prime Minister when you go before the Parliament to get a vote of confidence, but clearly the economic situation is already weighing on the new socialist government.
It was always going to weigh on the socialist government. We've been in a crisis in 2008, and now there is this audit which is coming out from the French National Auditing Body, and they're going to say, there's many missing. Surprise. The coffers are empty. Surprise. They got elected on a platform where they promised a great deal of expenditure. They're going to have to trim back the expenditure, and that's justification to trim back the expenditure. The dreaded word austerity will never be pronounced, and there have been promises of make work jobs for young people, 150,000. There's been promises over 5 years of 60,000 new jobs for teachers. All of this is expenditure. I think we will find out when the thing actually comes to pass that it is strung out over a period of several years, and that there's going to be a lot of taxes, but the taxes are not going to be enough to pay if we do not actually cut in government outlay, because this is completely the opposite of what the Socialist Party campaigned on. They need, first, to say the situation is disastrous, and two, they need to make at least a good show of sucking it to the rich. And once they've done that, they will basically do the kind of policies that everybody else in Western Europe is pursuing right now.
Do you agree that the socialists will basically have to just tear their campaign promises, throw them away, and do the opposite?
Well, they won't quite do the opposite because they haven't really promised that much. They've been very cautious, even during the campaign. Hollande was very, very cautious not to promise too much in order, because he knew perfectly well what was economically the situation of France, and therefore they promised to obviously increase taxes for the rich and people who have been saving a lot during the past presidency of Nicolas Sarkozy. But it's true, it won't be enough, and therefore you would have to cut state spending. And as far as he announced, it wasn't anyway yesterday time for Jean-Marc Ayrault, the Prime Minister, to announce anything. It was more, a classical exercise to draw the great lines of the 5 years to come, and it's pretty sure that they will reduce, the spending and the state spending. That's for sure. I think what they should have done as well, it's probably to cut down on the government, because we have a government with 38 ministers, which is a record, I think, in the Republic.
Mathieu Douaret, for now, the socialists, be it the president or the prime minister, have the trust of the majority of the French. So can they use that trust to make them swallow a bitter pill when it comes to the economy, when it comes to social spending?
What I think is that what is usual, and the contrary never happened, is that you always start with trust. No government has never started with a deficit in trust. They have always had a majority of people trusting them at the very beginning of their tenure. And generally, after 6 months, the situation was very different from the starting point. But this year, I think that the particular aspect of the situation is that expectations were not as high as they used to be. And so with little expectations, you can also expect a little disappointment, and not a big disappointment that generally transforms into a backlash in the polls, in particular at midterm elections, for example, the local elections to come 2 years from now. So I think what could be different from the usual trend would be that, starting not very high but comfortably high, they could in fact remain higher than observers might have expected, just because in fact their popularity is not based on a very high level of expectation, but rather, I would say, a rather high level of resignation.
Right. This idea that the French are already aware that there will be something, because they watch the news, they watch Greece, they watch Spain, Italy, they know that we're not operating in a vacuum. And the fact that there are no elections scheduled until 2014, could it in a way allow the socialists to do something that the right would be doing in normal times, meaning cut spending, take some painful measures, saying those are the sacrifices we need?
It's going to be interesting to watch, because the whole notion of sacrifice, if you want to really sort of look at how the last time the Prime Minister tried to sell the country was Raymond Barre in 1979, and it was a complete disaster. Raymond Barre spoke the truth, and he was Giscard d'Estaing's last Prime Minister, and before that he was his finance minister, he was a well-known economist, and he was a plain-spoken man. And he said, it's going to be tough, it's going to be difficult, and we're going to sort of, there's going to be austerity. There were one or two expressions that I forget, but those key expressions became political poison for the next 20 years or so. And everybody in French politics decided that the only thing you could do with the French they could not stomach the idea of somebody being frank about the fact that you need, blood, sweat, and tears. And so they've been lying throughout. Even Sarkozy lied on this. I mean, I'm not going to sort of go into a polemic about other things, but even Sarkozy didn't quite say the truth about the fact that people had to swallow basically a bitter pill. And it's really psychological. On the one hand, you have a population, I totally agree that the French don't have that many expectations. On the other hand, can you justify doing a number of things if you're not plain spoken about it? Because the whole gist of the campaign was we hate the rich, and there's another way of doing things, and we're going to have more teachers, we're going to have more civil servants, we're going to have more services, we're going to have a return to public services and the role of the state. And the state in France is already something like 54% of the economy, which is huge. France is it's a working command economy, but it still is a command economy in large tracts. Can this work at a time of economic crisis in the West and at the time of Eurozone crisis? I don't think it can. So even though those expectations are reduced, I think there's going to be a clash between the sort of stark reality and the fuzzy feeling that perhaps it's going to be different with this lot.
Do you think there is a danger for the socialist government if it decides to follow the austerity route without saying the word that the French was just pointed out, generally the politicians don't like to use the word, but could there be a clash between the socialists and the trade unions, for example, or the general public?
I
saying
think the socialists are more conscious that they are in a very narrow path. Why? Because, they were elected, though they have a clear majority at the assembly, it's true, but there was a great lot of non-voter, for the legislative election. And beside that, it's true that the National Front, weighed a lot in France. And obviously, neither Hollande nor Hérault can ignore that. And therefore, they have to be very, very cautious and careful in the way they will, increase the taxes or cut the spending. And but to answer what was said, I haven't heard Hollande saying that he would recruit many civil servants, and just said there would be a few teachers for the
60,000
primary.
Yes,
that's not a few.
In 5 years. In 5 years'
but
time.
And
150,000 youth jobs.
But okay, he said that, but he didn't say he would replace all people going to retire.
Else.
But he also said that this means that there'll be cuts in other areas of this. The
and they've already
service.
announced, for instance, in the prison, the previous government launched great programs of building new prison. And they've already decided to just cut it down by a third, I think, right. Which is very important.
That's not going to be popular. That is not going to play well.
But
that is a huge political mistake. If
you
anything,
have to displease someone when you start, to cutting expenses.
If you had a referendum on building prisons and on security, the security vote would win. I'm talking about a majority vote here. I'm not talking about displeasing a small fraction. I'm talking about a majority vote. I think it sends out... It's a godsend for a completely inept opposition, because we're going to talk about the UMP in a moment, and, boy, they can't do a thing. But it would be a godsend to any competent opposition. I think that is it's emblematic, and it's such a mistake.
Mathieu Douaret, the socialists are saying, okay, it'll be painful, but it will be fair. How do you do this?
I don't know how.
And I mean, is this really what's expected?
Yeah,
from,
I think the
is the issue of fairness as opposed to the perception that Nicolas Sarkozy only favored the rich?
I think
really something the socialists will need to.
Yeah, they fairly understood what people really thought about austerity. They thought that austerity could be two things, opposite things: either a policy only in favor of big business interests, and in fact a way to introduce a society model, as French say that they reject in the majority, or it could be a way to retrieve, to improve the French economy and also consolidate its society. And I think they think that the idea of recovering injustice is quite relevant. But on the other hand, I also agree that, for example, plain-spokenness is probably a necessity, but it should not be arrogance. So recovering injustice, that means also a kind of balanced approach that would be less aggressive than the one of the previous government. On the other hand, I think that security and justice, I mean the courts, this particular aspect of public policies, this is clearly a place where more plain-spokenness and more aggressiveness is expected. And in a way, the Minister of the Interior is doing the job quite well, and is quite popular. For this reason, he is now one of the most popular socialist politicians. Yeah. So I think this is the good approach. And the problem is more on the side of the Chancellery, where there are some problems in terms of adequation between what the Chancellor really thinks and what the public really expects from the government. There is probably a gap.
Okay, we have only a couple of minutes left. Denis de Montpion, on the right, do you agree that it's really chaos and nothing happening, or do you think it's just normal? They were in power, they lost the election.
No, exactly, it's normal. So now they have the summer and a bit more in order to find a new chief. So there's a struggle between the former Prime Minister François Fillon and Jean-François Copé, who is the leader of the UMP party. and therefore it's logical they should, fight to emerge, and we'll see in autumn how things are going on. It is the time where they make they declare such and such in order to win a majority in I think it's in November, sometime right. Then. And it's very likely that François Fillon, former Prime Minister, has a great chance to be the next head of the UMP party.
Elisabeth Moutet, would he be a thrilling choice?
It's absolutely thrilling. Copé suffers from the fact that he is, in many ways, he looks too much like Sarkozy. He's got the same sort of leaning to the right attitude on most society subjects, and he's got this sort of hungry young man look that people liked with Sarkozy and which they dislike now. Fillon is a provincial baron.
He's a normal man.
Yeah, well, normal is a new black. We'll see how long that lasts, but so far. So it is perfectly possible, unless something happens between now and November, that Fillon also has not antagonized that many people. People have a feeling that he's going to respect actually any kind of currents within the UMP that really should be shaken up. And Copé scares them because they don't know where he's going to take them, some places, but they don't know where. And quite honestly, the sort of the level of debate within the UMP party is practically sort of, it's not intellectual, it's non-existent, it's not really about politics, it's about who gets a job, who got saved from the wave of disasters that got, more than 100 of MPs out of Parliament. And right now they're shell-shocked, they're not thinking. So yes, in that sort of chaotic, sort of lunar landscape, I suspect Fillon will win.
Very quickly, the French prefer Fillon.
Let's see, because I think it's a bit artificial for the moment. Yeah, this clash doesn't really mean a lot for the general public. I think because what they see is that they are all accountable for the legacy of former President Sarkozy.
Okay, we'll see how this shapes up and whether Nicolas Sarkozy has his word to say. Thank you to all of you, and thank you for watching this edition of Politics here on France 24.